The wind came down from the mesa like a tired ghost, dragging dust and memory with it. By the time it reached the little town of Calico Bend, it carried the smell of smoke, horses, and judgment. They had her standing on a crate, a girl no older than 20, wrists bound with rough rope, a sign nailed to the post behind her, Witch. Her name was Clara Belle Hayes, though most had stopped saying it. She had lived quiet in the scrublands with her mother, healing cuts and burns with sage and salve. But when the sheriff's boy took sick and never rose again, whispers turned her name into a curse. Now her dress clung with sweat and dirt. Blood from a split lip traced her chin. She didn't cry. Only her eyes moved. Steady, pale, watching the crowd that had once waved to her on Sunday mornings. The preacher's voice cracked through the dry air. Let this be a lesson. Evil wears a gentle face. A few men nodded. A few women looked down. But in the back, leaning against the rail of the saloon, a rancher watched with his jaw tight. Elias Boone. He'd lost his wife to fever 2 winters ago. Since then, he spoke little, drank less, and worked his land till his hands blistered. He didn't know Clara well, only that she'd once patched up his mare after a barbed wire cut. She hadn't asked for pay, just smiled and said, "She's a good soul, that horse." When the sheriff looped the rope over the limb, the rancher felt something cold crawl up his spine. Clara whispered then, low but clear enough to reach him, "Please, don't untie it yet." The sheriff froze mid-motion. The words hung strange, like a prayer and a warning both. Her eyes found Boone in the crowd, and for a heartbeat he saw something there that didn't belong to this world of guns and gallows, something ancient, aching, and true. Then a child's voice cracked the silence. "Mama, she saved our cat." Heads turned. The mother hushed the child fast, but the spell was already bending. 1 heartbeat, then 2. No one breathed. Elias Boone's hands began to shake. The sky cracked open not long after they dragged Clara away. Rain in Calico Bend didn't come often, but when it did, it came like it had been waiting years. Thunder rolled over the hills like wagon wheels over bones. Elias Boone sat alone in his barn, oil lamp flickering. The rope burns on his palms from pulling the plow still stung. But another ache sat deeper, in the chest, right under the ribs. He kept seeing her eyes. The way she said those words, not begging, not fearful, just certain. Please don't untie it yet. He'd seen men beg at gunpoint, women wail for mercy, but never that. Outside, the storm worsened. Wind slammed the shutters, the cattle bellowed, and somewhere between thunderclaps came another sound, a horse running wild through the rain. Boone grabbed his lantern and stepped into the storm. Lightning tore across the sky, lighting the pasture in white streaks. A figure slumped over a wet, foam-slick horse was struggling toward his fence line. He ran. The rider collapsed before he reached her. Her face hit the mud, pale, eyes open. Rope still around her wrists. The word "witch" painted on her torn dress. Clara. For a long second, he stood there, the rain pounding his hat brim, the lantern flickering. Then instinct cut through shock. He scooped her up, carried her inside like she weighed nothing, and laid her on the cot by the fire. Steam rose off her dress. She coughed, gasped, and her lips moved. "They changed their minds halfway," she rasped, "said the storm was a sign. Then the wagon overturned." She coughed again, blood and rainwater mixing. He untied her wrists carefully. The skin beneath was raw and darkened, like the rope had burned through weeks of prayer. She flinched when he touched her. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't untie it yet." He froze. Same words again, softer this time, but laced with something close to terror. "You think I'm gonna hurt you?" he asked quietly. "No," she breathed. "But if they see me free, they'll come for you too." The wind howled through the cracks, pushing smoke from the hearth sideways. Boone sat back slowly. Her wrists stayed bound, but looser now, like a secret only the two of them shared. By morning, the storm had blown east, leaving the land washed in quiet, a rare, fragile calm. The world smelled of wet cedar and horse sweat. The fields shimmered in pale light, every blade of grass heavy with water. Clara lay beneath Boone's old wool blanket, half conscious. The sign that once marked her as witch now burned in the stove. Boone had fed it to the fire before dawn, one splinter at a time. It cracked, hissed, and disappeared into black ash. She stirred at the sound. Her wrists, still bound loosely, twitched. "You should have left me there," she whispered, voice dry as sand. Boone poured coffee into a tin mug and crouched beside her. "Storm would have killed you," he said simply. "Would have been cleaner than rope burn." He didn't answer. When she tried to sit, she winced. The skin under her wrists was raw and oozing. Boone reached for his saddlebag and pulled out a small tin. Inside, his wife's old salve, beeswax and pine oil. He hesitated before touching her. "I ain't much of a healer," he muttered. She looked at him. Not fear, not trust, just a tired sort of knowing. "Neither was my mother at first. Pain teaches the hand." He cleaned the wounds. She didn't flinch. Only when he brushed against the edge of an old scar, small, circular, branded into her forearm, did her breath catch. "That one's older," he said quietly. She nodded. "My father's mark. He branded me when I ran off with my mother's medicine books. Said knowledge was men's work. I kept the scar to remind myself. Never again." Boone's jaw tightened. He'd seen marks like that on cattle, on thieves, on deserters, but never on someone who still looked at the world with calm eyes. "They said I made the sheriff's boy sick," she continued. "Truth is, I warned them about the well. Poisoned water. They didn't listen." The words fell like small stones in the silence. Boone poured the leftover coffee into the dirt floor. "Town don't forgive what it don't understand." She gave a faint smile. "And you? You understand?" "No," he said. "But I seen enough good people hang to stop asking who deserves it." The fire popped. Outside, crows began to gather along the fence, a black line of watchful eyes. Boone went to the window. "They'll come by noon," he said. "Sheriff don't leave loose ends." Clara turned her hands slowly, the rope frayed but still tied. "Then don't untie it yet," she said again. "Not till we make them believe I'm still their monster." Boone turned. "And after that?" She looked toward the horizon, pale sunlight glinting off the wet hills. "After that, you burn the rope." By the time the sun clawed its way over the ridge, the world had that cold, metallic stillness that comes before violence. Boone heard them long before he saw them. Hooves drumming on soaked earth, bridles clinking, the low murmur of men trying to sound brave. He stood by the barn door, shotgun resting lazy in his hands, though there was nothing lazy in his stance. Clara sat inside on the cot, wrists still tied, hair damp, face pale but sharp. She had washed the dirt off, and the faint shimmer of clean skin made the bruises stand out darker. The sheriff led 6 men. Their coats were wet with rain, dust already crusting at the seams. He swung down from his horse, spit into the mud, and looked Boone up and down. "You seen a girl pass through? Which by the name of Clarabelle Hayes?" Boone chewed a piece of straw like it might help him lie straighter. "Ain't seen no one since the storm. Just my cattle, half scared to death." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He was the kind of man who smiled when others didn't. "She's a danger, Boone. You'd be doing this town a kindness if you told me where she ran." Boone shrugged. "Don't see much kindness in Rope." The sheriff's grin faded. "That storm turned the wagon. One of my boys is dead. Another broke his leg. You understand how that looks? Folks'll say she cursed us." Boone's gaze flicked toward the barn door. Storms don't take orders. Inside, Clara's hands trembled, not from fear, but from holding still. She could hear every word through the wood slats. Her pulse thudded with the rhythm of hooves. Then came a noise, a small bleat. One of Boone's goats, restless, had wandered too close to the door and brushed against it. The sheriff's head snapped up. "You sure you're alone?" Boone's fingers tightened on the gun. "Reckon I am." But the door creaked, slightly open behind him, not from the wind this time, and there she was. Clara stepped into the light, rope still around her wrists, eyes level and unafraid. "You don't have to search," she said, voice steady. "I'm right here." The sheriff's horse snorted. One of the deputies drew his revolver. "Get back, witch!" Boone's jaw twitched. But Clara lifted her hands, showing the rope. "You see this?" she said quietly. "I'm still bound. If your God wanted me dead, the river would have taken me last night." The sheriff hesitated, superstition flickering behind his eyes. Then, from the ridge, a sound broke the silence, a child's voice again, high and uncertain. "Mama, she's not bad. She fixed our cat." It was the same little girl from yesterday, clutching her mother's skirt at the edge of town. The men turned. For the briefest heartbeat, something cracked. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the edge of doubt. Boone stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and the guns. "You heard her. The girl's done enough suffering. You drag her back now. You're hanging what's left of your own conscience." The sheriff stared at him a long time. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat. Then, slow as dusk, he mounted his horse again. "You keep her out of sight, Boone. Next storm that rolls through, I won't be stopping it." He turned his men around. The sound of hooves faded down the muddy road until only the wind remained. Clara exhaled. Not relief, exactly, but something close to disbelief. Boone holstered the gun, eyes on her wrists. "You can untie me now," she said softly. Boone reached for the knot, then stopped. "You sure?" She nodded once. "Yes, but don't burn it yet." Night came slow and mean, dragging a cold wind out of the canyon. Boone's ranch sat under a bruised sky, stars hidden behind low clouds that glowed faint orange from the lightning far away. Clara stood by the fence, her wrists now free, though the skin still bore the angry rings of rope. Boone watched her from the porch, lantern light cutting her figure out of the darkness, like a ghost that hadn't decided if it wanted to stay. "You should rest," he said finally. She shook her head. "I've been resting all my life, while they buried truth under their fear." Her voice had a quiet fire in it now, low and sure. She reached down, picked up the coiled rope from the mud, the same one that had nearly ended her. It was stiff, heavy, still smelling faintly of smoke and blood. Boone took a slow step forward. "You said not to burn it yet. Now it's time." He didn't ask why. Some things didn't need explaining between the damned and the kind-hearted. They walked to the edge of the cattle field, where the ground dipped toward the creek. The moon broke through the clouds just long enough to light the water, a thin silver scar cutting through the dark. Boone gathered dry brush, his movements deliberate, almost reverent. Clara struck the flint. Sparks leapt, caught. The rope hissed as the fire crawled up it, twisting, blackening. The smell was sharp, hemp and salt and memory. Clara watched, face still. That rope was their proof, she said. Now it's just smoke. Boone poked at the fire with a branch. You think they'll let that smoke go easy? No, but smoke doesn't ask permission to rise. He almost smiled at that. Almost. Then she did something unexpected, reached into the pocket of her torn dress and pulled out a small silver locket. Inside was a pressed sprig of sage and a curl of hair. She placed it gently into the flames. My mother's, she said softly. She never lived to see me stand up for what she taught. The fire flared bright for a heartbeat, then sank back into a red whisper. A low sound carried from the barn then, a horse shifting, uneasy. Boone looked up. On the ridge, a flicker of light. Torches. More than one. They're coming, he said. Clara didn't move. Her eyes were still on the rope. Now nothing but glowing strands. Then let them come. Boone's pulse quickened. He grabbed his rifle from the porch rail, checked the chamber. You don't understand, Clara. They'll burn this whole place if they think you're still alive. Then maybe, she said quietly, we give them something else to burn. He looked at her, truly looked this time, and saw not the frightened girl from the gallows, but a woman forged by every cruelty meant to break her. The firelight painted her face in copper and shadow. The wind shifted, carrying smoke toward town. They'll see it, Boone murmured. Good, she said. Let them think it's me burnin'. By dawn, the valley was thick with smoke. The fire had burned through the brush by the creek, throwing up a column that looked, from town, like judgment itself. Calico Ben woke to whispers. She's gone. The witch's soul took flame. They say Boone's ranch is cursed now. The sheriff rode out before sunrise with 2 men, their eyes wary. But when they reached Boone's land, all they found was blackened soil, the faint smell of sage, and a single horseshoe pressed deep into the mud, as if someone had left a mark just to prove they'd lived. Boone and Clara were gone. They had slipped out before the sky turned pale, crossing the back ridge into canyon country, where the air still smelled of storm and juniper. Boone's old mule carried a pack of what little they owned, blankets, a coffee tin, her mother's tattered book of herbs. The trail was narrow, winding through stone and shadow. Boone led the way, rifle slung low. Clara followed, the sun catching in her hair, the skin of her wrists still raw. They stopped by an abandoned miner's shack, half collapsed, forgotten by everyone but the wind. Boone built a fire in the corner, hearth, careful to shield the smoke with wet leaves. Clara sat nearby, cutting strips of cloth from her ruined dress. You don't have to keep running, he said finally. You think I'm running? She asked. He looked at her, brow furrowed. Feels like it. She smiled faintly, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. I'm not running. I'm starting again somewhere they don't remember what I was. She touched her wrist, tracing the mark the rope left behind, a ring of pale skin, tender and unhealed. You ever had something burned off your name, Boone? Plenty, he said. Only difference is, folks still forget mine. The fire popped. For a long while, the only sound was wind moving through the dry pines. Then faintly, from somewhere down the canyon, came the echo of hooves. Boone's hand went to his gun. "Sheriff!" Clara didn't flinch. "Let him come. The smoke told them what they wanted, that the witch burned. Now they'll just find two wanderers on the trail." Boone studied her face, saw how calm she looked, how certain. "You're gambling with my life, too. You know that?" She met his eyes. "I know." He exhaled slow, the kind of breath that carries both surrender and decision. "All right then," he said. "We'll play ghosts for a while." When the sheriff arrived at the canyon mouth later that afternoon, he found the old shack cold. No fire, no footprints, but the faint trail of hooves heading south. He picked up a half-burnt scrap of cloth from the ashes. On it, faintly stitched by hand, were two letters, CH. He turned it over once, twice, then let it drop into the dust. "Let her go," he muttered. "The desert'll do the rest." But as he rode away, a hawk rose from the cliffs above, circling wide, crying sharp against the sky, a sound that didn't belong to endings. They rode until their shadows grew long again, following a dry riverbed that snaked through red rock and silence. The air was thick with sun and dust, the kind that clings to sweat and memory. Every step the mule took sounded like a heartbeat under the open sky. By the third evening, they reached a small hollow between two cliffs, a place where a thin trickle of water still ran, feeding a patch of wild green. Boone stopped his horse and stared. "Ain't much," he said, "but it's hidden." Clara slid down, knees buckling slightly. She pressed her palms to the earth, feeling the damp beneath. "Hidden's all I ever wanted," she murmured. They built a camp there, a ring of stones for fire, a lean-to from canvas and pine boughs. Boone worked quietly, the way men do when silence feels safer than hope. Clara gathered plants, naming each under her breath like old friends: yarrow, wild thyme, desert sage. That night they ate beans by the fire. Boone noticed how she leaned closer to the flames, as if their warmth could erase the memory of rope and cold rain. "What'll you do now?" he asked. "Plant," she said. "Grow something that won't hang." He looked at her, a faint smile tugging the corner of his mouth. "So you're making a garden in the desert. If the world won't give you a place, you carve one." The next morning, she did just that. With her bare hands, she turned dry dirt, mixing it with ash from their fire. Boone watched her from the shade, his hat low, eyes tired but softened. She found a patch of damp soil near the trickle of the creek and pressed seeds into it, saved from a pouch around her neck. "Sage and beans," she said. "My mother always said they keep the ghosts away." Boone chuckled under his breath. "You sure we ain't the ghost now?" She looked up at him, squinting through the sunlight. "Maybe. But even ghosts can grow roots if they stop running." He didn't reply. Instead, he knelt beside her and helped dig. Their hands moved through the dirt together, rough, calloused, but alive. Hours passed. The sun sank low. A cool wind came down from the ridge. When they finally stopped, Clara leaned back on her heels, covered in dust and sweat but smiling faintly. Before them lay a small patch of earth, darkened by effort and hope. "Looks like nothing," Boone said. "Everything starts that way." As the stars came out, Boone poured the last of their water over the soil. The ground hissed softly, drinking it in. Clara whispered something. Not a prayer, not exactly, more like a promise. The next morning, before sunrise, Boone found her standing over the garden again, fingertips brushing the soil, Her wrists caught the first light, and he saw how the scars, once raw and angry, had begun to fade. "They'll find us some day," he said quietly. "Maybe," she answered. "But when they do, they'll see life growing out of what they tried to kill." Boone nodded, a slow, heavy motion, half belief, half exhaustion. He reached into his coat and pulled something from his pocket. It was the metal hook from the rope that nearly hung her, bent, blackened by fire. He pressed it into the dirt beside the seedlings like a marker. "If anyone comes looking," he said, "they'll know the witch didn't die. She just changed the ground she walks on." Clara smiled then, the first real one. "No witch ever scared me half as much as a man learning to hope again." Boone looked at her, eyes glinting under the brim of his hat. "Don't make too much of it. Hope's just another chore." She laughed softly, the sound small but whole. The wind picked up, scattering dust across the new-planted soil. It looked almost like snow for a moment, pale, fleeting, beautiful. Neither of them spoke again for a long time. They just sat there, two souls burned down to their bare truth, watching the ground breathe beneath the desert sky. Seasons in the canyon don't change like they do elsewhere. They just shift their color. By midsummer, the green had crept outward from the little patch they had planted, winding through the dust like veins of defiance. The beans grew thick, the sage spread wide, and in the middle of it all, a small white flower bloomed, the kind that only opens in heat, so fierce most things die from it. Clara knelt by it every morning. She never said much. She didn't need to. The earth had learned her language. Boone built a fence, fixed the roof of the shack, hunted when he had to. He still didn't talk about what he'd lost, the wife, the ranch, the easy life that ended with a fever, and a bullet of loneliness that never quite worked its way out. But sometimes, when he caught Clara humming near the creek, he'd stop what he was doing, just to listen. The tune carried no words, just old breath turned into something soft. They became what the land allowed them to be, not lovers, not fugitives, not saints, just survivors who shared a silence that didn't hurt anymore. One evening, near the tail end of summer, they heard hoofbeats again, faint, echoing off stone. Boone's hand went to his rifle out of habit, but Clara touched his arm. "Wait," she whispered. Out of the fading light came a single rider, a young boy on a skinny horse, dust in his hair, a bundle under his arm. When he saw them, he slowed, lifted a hand. "You're her, ain't you?" he said breathlessly. "The witch from Calico Bend." Boone stiffened. Clara only smiled. "What makes you think so?" The boy fumbled with his bundle, pulled out a torn scrap of newspaper. It showed a charcoal sketch of her face, crude, angry lines, with a headline that read, "Witch perishes in fire outside Calico Bend." "They said you burned," the boy said, "but my sister, she got sick again. I figured maybe you didn't." Boone's eyes met hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Clara stood, wiped her hands on her skirt, and crouched before the boy. "There's no witches, son. Just people who know the old ways of the earth. You take this." She plucked a stem of sage, wrapped it in cloth, and tied it with a piece of her old rope, the last remnant she kept. "Boil it in water. Have your sister breathe the steam. Don't let fear do the rest." The boy nodded, eyes wide. Boone gave him a nod too, a silent blessing from one quiet outlaw to another. When the boy rode off, the canyon swallowed the sound until there was only wind again. Clara stood long after he disappeared. "They'll tell it different, won't they?" she said. "They always do," Boone answered. "Then let 'em. Maybe the lie saves someone else." She reached into the dirt, brushing away dust from the base of the small flower. Beneath it, the blackened hook, the old rope's metal clasp, still sat half buried. She left it there, pressed deeper, until the earth took it whole. "Let that stay," she whispered. "It belonged to death. The rest belongs to the living." Weeks passed. The rains came once more. Boone woke one dawn to find Clara gone down to the creek. When he followed, he saw her standing in the water, skirts heavy, sunlight catching her hair like gold dust. "You're leavin'," he said, though it wasn't a question. "Not leavin'. Just movin' where I can help, without them lookin' for monsters." Boone swallowed hard, jaw tight. "You could stay." She looked at him then, truly looked, the way a person memorizes what they can't keep. "You gave me a second life, Boone. Don't waste it waiting on ghosts." He wanted to speak, but the words turned to dust in his throat. She stepped closer, pressed her palm against his chest. "Your heart's still beatin'. That's proof enough." Then she walked away, through sage and shadow, barefoot, the hem of her dress trailing dust. She didn't look back. Boone stayed. He kept the garden, let it grow wild. When travelers came through, he gave them food, herbs, and stories. None ever matched what really happened, but every tale carried her in it somehow. A whisper of smoke, a song in the wind, a white flower blooming where nothing should. Years later, when Boone's hair turned silver and the garden stretched wide across the canyon floor, strangers still spoke of the witch who burned and the rancher who disappeared with her. And if you walk there today, when the wind shifts just right and the dust moves like breath, you might still see a patch of green in the red earth, a single white flower standing tall beside a bent, half-buried hook of iron. A quiet proof that sometimes the ones the world condemns don't vanish. They take root. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe to my channel. And